First, let's go ahead and just talk about recent events. You know, we've got quite a bit of rainfall in July upstream, especially along the Llano River. We got a good amount in the last couple of days this week that is helping, you know, boost lake levels at least enough to stop the bleeding and also have us in better shape compared to the last couple of years. How do we stand, in your opinion, now versus previous years, thanks to these recent events?
Well, this has been a very interesting summer. You know, the last several summers have been record heat, very dry, very low inflows. We had a very good May. May came in and we picked up quite a bit of storage out of the event that occurred in May. About 250,000 acre-feet of water comes into the system, most of it up in the Buchanan part of the system. It was an upper basin flood event, and so that came into Lake Buchanan, which was terribly low at the time, and we gained about 12 and a half, 13 feet of elevation on that impoundment. And then obviously the July, which is such a counter story for that time of year, because July usually we're really ramping up the heat, we're really in a hot, dry part of the cycle, and this particular July we had a 2-week period with incredibly low afternoon high temperatures, rainfall throughout the Austin area, and really good benefit to Lake Travis, over 7 feet of elevation change in Lake Travis, over and above what was being used on a day in, day out basis. I think the story is even better because of it wasn't just the water that came into the system, it was also the reduction in demands that we saw throughout our region because of those lower temperatures and the local rainfall that we received. People watered their yards a lot less.
Yep, I'll be asking a whole lot more about water use and, you know, what this summer could have looked like in a little bit. Break down this most recent flooding event for us and the floodgate operations that, you know, are putting some water into Lake Travis as we speak.
Well, we had another event that was centered on the Llano part of the watershed, the Llano River part of the watershed, which is north and west of Austin. And so that and Sandy Creek, which is a direct feeder into Lake LBJ, both of those saw some flood flows come into it. And so we had to, in addition to our hydroelectric operations, we had to open up some floodgate, just one gate partial opening at both Wirtz Dam and at Starkey Dam to be able to pass that water into Lake Travis.
Going back to kind of the most recent summers, which were brutal, record setting across the board with heat. I mean, most days over 105, I think, back in last year. We were at a really terrible starting point heading into summer 2024. In 2022, Lake Travis dropped somewhere between 10 and 15 feet between June and November, end of November, or start of November, I should say. It was kind of the same story in 2023, 2022, about 10 to 15 foot drop on Lake Travis through the course of the summer. If we had done that again this year with the same kind of brutal heat wave, that would have gotten us very close to the all-time record low water level for Lake Travis. What kind of conversation do you think we would be having right now if we didn't get bailed out, so to speak, by July, May, and now September?
So if you would have had a repeat of the year that we kind of like what we'd seen in 2022, 2023 in terms of the climatic conditions, and if you had not seen a significant change in water use patterns, you would have been having conversations around mandatory curtailment measures, mandatory conservations over and above anything that we had had in the previous couple of years. The lakes would be at their lowest points that we had had. Probably Lake Travis would be at its lowest points. It's funny the way nature works, though. That's not the way that it came down, even though our El Nino went away. Yep. And we're transitioning to a La Nina, and statistically, this time of year, we're not supposed to see in July what we saw in July, or even last week, what we saw over the weekend. And so about the time you think you're getting ahead of being able to anticipate what's going to happen, nature comes in and provides some surprises, and that's definitely what we've seen over the course of the last year with significant benefit. I would say we've seen a benefit that was almost unanticipated for the summertime.
I would agree. Absolutely, yeah. None of it looked good going into the summer. So thankful, of course, and that was the first time I've seen you smile a little bit. Of course, I'm sure the LCRA is breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that we've got this extra cushion as we head into another La Nina. On that note, La Nina is kind of what got us to this low point in the first place. Ever since the October 2018 flood, it's been more or less a steady decline year after year on our water storage reservoirs. Lake Buchanan, Lake Travis.
2019, roughly September of 2019 was, so we flooded through the fall of 2018 and all through the spring of 2019 because I was in flood operations during that entire time. And so it was early fall of 2019 that we started to see the pattern that stayed in place really hardcore in 2022, 2021, late 2021, 2022, and 2023.
So it's La Nina that got us here to this point. We got some help with an El Nino weather pattern, but that was quick compared to the triple dip La Nina we had the previous few years. Are you concerned about where we could be heading for water storage heading back into a La Nina this fall, winter, maybe even into the spring? And what does this mean in general heading into 2025?
Well, I'm a reservoir manager in an arid part of the world, so I'm always concerned.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's pretty much how we live and how we have to prepare. So my team has to think in terms of, even though we're in a part of the world that goes between floods and droughts, we stay focused on droughts. And we updated our drought contingency plan in the last year to be able to add some additional flexibility and some additional measures to be able to respond to these very dynamic dry conditions. And I think you'll see that throughout the retail providers as well, whether they're cities or districts, that a recognition that conservation and increasing conservation has to be a part of the conversation on a day in, day out basis going forward. And you don't really ever get to a point where your supplies are covered to the point where you stop that.
Especially, looking long-term, a growing population here in Central Texas using more water, and perhaps as the climate shifts here in Texas, and especially for the Highland Lake watershed basin, those are going to be
more water, but using water increasingly differently.
Yep. How so?
Well, if you talk to anybody that is in the utility space, whether it's a city or a district, the people that provide water to our homes, and our businesses, they will tell you that if you compare January water usage, which is really the lowest water usage that you have during the year, that's when you're brushing your teeth and washing your clothes and that sort of thing within your home, and you look at what's happening in July or August, what you're going to see is a marked increase in the amount of water supply that's being used through those utilities. And when you dig down into those numbers for July and August and you start to say, okay, well, where does the water go in a hot, dry week in August? 70% of that water is going out to landscapes. It's going to discretionary water uses and not essential water uses. And so when you look at that data point, that's one that speaks volumes to me in terms of the type of changes we're going to need to see going forward in Central Texas.
Is a bigger change, if you will, in the overall mindset of how we use water, right? That would be best. What would you say on that note to anyone who has the right and perhaps the finances to pay for the water that they're justified to use under the current regulations, that maybe spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort to manicure their yard, make it look nice in the typical fashion, green grass, maybe non-native plants. What would you say to that kind of a water customer to try to get them to change their habits in that discretionary water use?
Well, you have to start with the premise that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And increasingly, with more people coming to this part of the world, because it's a wonderful place to be, we're going to have to do more to be able to accommodate those folks coming here. Yes, we're going to bring more supplies in. We spend a lot of time focused on bringing additional supplies into our region, but there's also going to have to be a commensurate level of conservation in ways that people haven't maybe thought of. And I'll give you a great example of this. As I talk to people about what their landscapes need to look like going forward, one of the things that I really focus on is what our folks that work in this space tell us over and over again, and that is it has to start with reducing the amount of square footage that you have that requires irrigation. Turf especially is very thirsty, and if you have a turf that doesn't belong in this part of the world, or landscaping with plants that don't belong in this part of the world, you're going to be really challenged to be able to keep that yard looking good during August and a normal hot, dry summer. So the challenge is to say you need to create a good, attractive space that can live on water once a week. Most people don't think that way, and that's a transition that we'll have to have in Central Texas going forward.
I personally let my yard brown, and I wear it with pride because it always comes back as soon as that first, September rain hits. Right. I wish more in Central Texas would gather that message, and hopefully they will in, the years ahead.
If you change your turf and you go to more native type turfs, the buffalo grasses are some great examples of that. If you go to landscaping with shrubs that are native to Central Texas, that are used to living through the type of environment that we have here, your yard won't look nearly as bad, and it will recover much more quickly when we have these rainfall events.
Yep, I agree. On that note of discretionary water use and even water waste, estimates each year just for the city of Austin are that we're spending or using about 5 to 8 or even 9 billion gallons of water just through poor infrastructure, leaking pipes. Do you have any idea of what that number looks like on an entire basis for your customer base?
Well, Austin is our largest customer by an order of magnitude. They dwarf any of our other customers. In terms of a total amount, I don't have a number for what the total amount is. I get a lot more focused on the things that I can control. And the things that I can control are things like how we approach providing water to people through the infrastructure that we have, how we manage water through the reservoirs. Our largest water user is the sun and the wind. It's evaporation. In gross terms, when I'm thinking between 160 and 180,000 acre feet of water a year that goes out to the sun and to the wind, that's the thing that I get really focused on.
And there's no real defense against that, is there?
There's not. One of the only benefits that you have from lower lake levels is the surface area of the lake is reduced, and so our evaporative losses goes down.
Yep, but then the rate of decline increases if the public use of water remains steady.
Right. I think a challenge that you have with respect to the loss rates, and there's been multiple statewide reports on concerns with losses within distribution systems or utility systems that are out there. A lot of this infrastructure has been in the ground for a long time, in some cases 40 years, 50 years, and it's reaching the end of its useful life. And so being able to fund the type of programs that it takes to be able to go in and update that infrastructure so that they don't have the type of leaks and losses that they have now is going to have to be a major consideration for our state going forward. It's not just in our basin, it's a statewide concern, and funding for that is going to be really big.
On the note of summer water use, a lot of it goes to evaporation, a lot of it goes to irrigation. Historically, especially during the drought of record, say early 2010s, when we were in our drought of record, lake levels were very low then as well. There was a lot of concern among the public about water being passed downstream for downstream customers, where the Colorado River runs into southeast Texas around Matagorda Bay. Tell us about the Arbuckle Reservoir, where you stand with that. Why there were delays and when it's finally going to come online.
Well, the Arbuckle Reservoir project is a major reservoir project. It's the only one that we have that represents reservoir storage downstream of Austin, where we get roughly twice the amount of rainfall that we get up here. So storage in that part of the world is very, very important for us and very strategic for our basin. That reservoir doesn't operate in a vacuum though. When it comes online, it'll operate along with Buchanan and Travis as a 3-reservoir system, along with our other water rights within the Colorado River. With respect to whether people look at the basin as apportioned, whether there's a lower basin or an upper basin, we're the Lower Colorado River Authority, which basically includes everything from Ivy Reservoir down, and that's how we go in and manage the system. So Arbuckle is a project that has had a lengthy construction associated with it. We've just finished up the last leg of that journey. Our seepage barrier wall has been completed, and we're starting the testing leg of that journey, and that's what we'll be doing through the end of the year, when we hope to have it online at the end of this year.
And when it is online, that water going into that reservoir is going to come directly from the Colorado River,
Yes.
right? As it is in perhaps a surplus with some additional rain once it's online, right?
Yeah, it's not unusual at all for us to have rainfall in the Austin area or downstream and not have rainfall in the arid region that feeds our highland lakes.
Yep.
And so that reservoir project is strategically located to be able to take advantage of those flows that originate downstream of Austin and to be able to store those and bank them for use in the lower basin.
And I know this isn't going to totally alleviate the strain on Lake Travis, but can you give any sort of metric to what this means for Lake Travis in those summer storage months and how much water is going to be saved?
Well, the wonderful part of it is being able to use locally stored water first. It's not a large enough reservoir to be able to take care of all the needs in the lower basin, and that's why we have a 3-reservoir system. And at any given time, they are at different stages of storage. So it's really an exciting prospect to be able to think in terms of using that local reservoir first for those needs that are down there, whether it's the bay and a healthy bay ecosystem or whether it's our water users in the lower basin. And generally speaking, what that means is water that right now has to be released from either Lake Travis or Buchanan, and it's not just Lake Travis, it's Lake Travis and Buchanan, those releases are not going to happen with the same frequency as they had in the past.
On that note, even if, let's say the reservoir downstream, Arbuckle Reservoir, is full, it's healthy, there's plenty of water for downstream customers, Lake Travis is still going to have to be sending water intermittently downstream via hydroelectric operations just to maintain some of the downstream pass-through lakes, correct?
Well, there's only one pass-through lake below Lake Travis, and that's Lake Austin. And that's the intake point for 2 of Austin's water treatment plants and multiple other water utilities here in Central Texas. So water needs to go through Mansfield Dam every day to be able to feed those customers.
And we talked about water use for normal uses, even the discretionary use, and passing water downstream for downstream customers down in Southeast Texas. There's a different and perhaps unregulated in spots use for water in the straws that can be tapped into the reservoirs directly from nearby residents along the lakes. That could be just a Lake Travis thing. I would imagine there's also some customers that may try to siphon water from Lake LBJ, Lake Marble Falls, Inks Lake, maybe even Lake Austin. Do you know how many there are, how many customers there are, how much water they are using, and do you have any idea of what you may not be able to see, people that are not going through the actual permitting process to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's not unregulated. The state of Texas does regulate it, and come to find out, you can't take water unless you have a contract or a water right. So that's the fundamental premise as you begin. We've got about 3,500 contracts for domestic users around the Highland Lakes. 2/3 of those are Lake LBJ. Lake Travis, even though it's a very large lake, because of the dynamics at Lake Travis, it's a harder lake to be able to have domestic use from because the elevation of that lake changes a whole lot. So like right now, if you take a look at Lake Travis is down low enough to where, particularly if you're on an old high bank side of the reservoir, getting to the water is very, very difficult. And so we have, for the last 10 years, had a presence on the lakes, an enforcement presence on the lakes where we do inspections. And under the terms of our contracts, there's only certain days that people can water. So for example, right now, those domestic users can only water on Saturday and Sunday. So if our team is out on Thursday and you're watering with that pump, we know you're watering outside of the contract terms.
And how often do you run into that sort of issue? Where you're
not as often as you would think. We keep a record of all of our inspection reports that we run when we have our guys out on the water. We also kind of cross-train our other people that if they happen to be out on the water for another reason and they see something, that they're able to come back to our domestic use team and basically report that. So we can go in. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll contact people and say, hey, do you have a contract? And they actually do have a contract, but it was maybe under their grandmother's name. Or so you have to kind of go in and do the research to be able to figure that out. If they don't have a contract, most of them will get a contract. They'll say, I didn't know I needed to have a contract. We've had so many people move to Central Texas and so much of a change in ownership on some of those property on the lake, and some of them just aren't aware of the fact that they can't just take water.
Do you encounter how often do you encounter people that try to, just throw a pipe in the water, slide under the radar, and hopefully you can just get some free water out of our lakes?
Oh, I think it's definitely something that there are maybe a very few people that are predisposed to that sort of activity, but they're also probably doing that in other parts of their lives as well. We will pretty aggressively go after that, and the first time they say, I don't need a contract, we don't let it lay at that, and then we go back and make sure, we'll check again to see if they're continuing to take water.
Gotcha. We talked about the overwhelming majority of use coming from irrigation, 70% as you said.
Yeah, up to 70% according to the EPA.
Yeah, that would be a huge reduction on our use alone.
Yes.
Use is just one part of the equation. Of course, supply is the other side, as you well know. I'm preaching to the choir here. What kind of contingency plans are there as our climate is undeniably shifting to one that is perhaps hotter and more arid for much of your supply basin. What kind of contingency is there if we do indeed get, where we could have been this year at the lowest record level possible, or at least since the dams were constructed in the 1940s and 50s? And what future implementation of maybe some loftier goals of higher restrictions do y'all have at your disposal?
I think what you see initially is the trigger levels change with respect to when certain conservation measures kick in. Obviously, all of us transition as the water usage increases, and if, for example, we go through a dry cycle like the one that we've been in where the inflows decrease the amount of water coming into the system to replenish it. So it calls into question when your drought measures kick in, and so that's one of the things that we did when we updated our drought plan this summer, was to update those trigger levels and update the amount of reductions that are necessary to comply with those trigger levels. And that ripples through to our customers. Our customers are required to have plans that are at least as restrictive as the plans that we have. In terms of looking into the future, I think what you'll see is a greater and greater focus on either incentivizing conservation measures at a macro level, at the retail level, as well as having disincentives to water use in the form of surcharges if your water use goes over a certain point. That's particularly effective for the retail service providers. We also have surcharges for our customers. If we have customers that use more water than they have agreements to provide, they have a pretty healthy fee that they have to pay on top of that.
We just added a reservoir, the LCRA I should say, down in southeast Texas, the Arbuckle Reservoir. Are there any future plans or perhaps future opportunities, places where a new reservoir to increase the overall storage could be placed along the Colorado River?
So I think what you're going to see is a focus on utilization of storage projects like reservoirs, and in particular off-channel reservoirs. I don't think you're going to see large in-channel reservoirs be constructed anymore. Our environmental ethic is a little different now than what it was when these reservoirs were created, and trying to get permits for those would be next to impossible. So the type of projects like Arbuckle, these off-channel reservoir projects, I think are going to play a factor in our lower basin. I think you will also see an integration of different types of water resources, such as groundwater usage, along with reuse of effluent and existing use of some of the water rights that LCRA owns but maybe doesn't have storage for. It's not out of the question to see us taking a look at another storage project somewhere in the middle part of the basin, somewhere between here and the Bastrop area, because that's where we have so much growth.
Right. That was going to be my next question. It seems like that would be a logical place to maybe construct a new piece of storage just to have more water. That's never something you don't want to see. If you can have more water, then if you capture it in times of plentiful rainfall, then you start to alleviate some of the concerns with growing population and a changing climate.
Making better use of the water resources we have, though, represents a very serious, potentially, it's like a new source of supply. But when you start looking at the losses within the system, throughout all of the systems, when you start looking at the landscape watering and the amount of water that's being used on non-essential things, and you really start to get very focused on trying to eliminate those as much as possible, that represents a great deal of water.
How do you see the overall health of the network of lakes, dams, overall water storage in 2024, and how do you feel in general about where we're going from here?
As a manager of a reservoir system, kind of ride through these cycles, and it's hard for people in the immediate sense to get a real feel for what that looks like. But if I'm talking to you in November of 2018 or even March of 2019, we're wondering if it's ever going to stop raining. Yeah. We went through a very significant flooding cycle. The same thing kind of happened in 2015 and 2016, if you'll remember. The thing that took us out of the drought of record was major flooding cycle. And then we go into these dry cycles, and conservation gets on everybody's minds, and we get very focused on what's happening within the lakes. And then at some point, our basin does a change, and we have a major event that comes through, and then people get very focused on flooding as well. We have to keep our eyes focused on the system of water supply through the waxing and waning of what happens out there in the watershed. So what that means is we have to continue to have discussions about water use even when people don't want to have them. We need to have discussions about landscaping and things that drive water usage, discussions about leaks even when nobody wants to talk about those. Well, that's really expensive. Yeah, it is.
No, Lake Travis is 100% full. We just had a big flood.
Right.
Why are we talking about this?
Lake Travis is in the flood pool. Why are we having this conversation? And it's just exactly like why in the middle of a drought we have flood exercises. And why we spend a lot of money on dam infrastructure, because we know these are cyclical and we're going to be in a flood cycle, and that dam equipment better work and it better be fit and ready to go, and our team better have their head really in the game when we have to manage a major flood exercise.
I think you've already hit the nail on the head here. I just want to hear it again.
Yeah.
The biggest tool at our disposal for helping us conserve water with a growing population is what we use it on, right?
Yes. Yeah, in particular, our discretionary water use. I'm not talking about the food that we cook meals for our families with, that we bathe our children with, any of those uses. Those uses are, if you take a look at what we've done with indoor water usage, we've really done a good job with reducing indoor water usage. You can't find non-conservation oriented appliances in our homes anymore. Toilets, low flow shower heads, that's all part and parcel of what we have in our homes. This discretionary bit is what is left.
John, any parting words, advice for viewers at home, or any sentiments of where we're heading or what we can all do to help?
I think the challenge for our Central Texas communities are really to not let, whenever the rains come, dampen their enthusiasm for rethinking how they approach things like that discretionary water use, like that landscaping, like their yards, and to really carry that forward, whether it's dry or whether it's wet. Understanding that for Central Texas, that's part of what we're going to need to do to live in this part of the world and to thrive with the type of growing populations that we have in our area.
I couldn't agree more. I think the last time I spoke with you at the LCRA Media Day, I asked the question, do you think people are going to get a false sense of security after, the flooding that occurred upstream back in May, and y'all reduced water restrictions?
Right.
Let's hope everyone knows that no matter what the lakes say or what level they're at or how much water we have, that we just keep conserving.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people that have a voice to be able to continue to voice that very concern. And I know from LCRA's perspective, that's one of the things that we're taking as kind of a missional, purposeful mindset, is to be able to say we're going to be talking about this going forward, rain or shine.
Regardless of where we stand.
Yes.
Anything else you want to include before we wrap up?
No.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.